Well, salam, peace, and shalom. Welcome to the fall session of Interfaith Explorations. And today is the third session of this 8-week fall course. We will meet till November 17th and then reconvene in January. My name is Sophia Said, your host, Executive Director of the Interfaith Center. And I think we don't have any new faces today, so I won't do the long introduction. You all know who I am. And you all know who Dr. McDaniel is, our co host, our teacher, our facilitator. Where are you, Jay?
Right here.
Right here, I was going to highlight you. Jay serves on the board of Cobb Institute in California, and I always like to mention it because Cobb Institute is the co-sponsor for these classes. And Cobb Institute promotes a process and relational worldview to advance wisdom, harmony, and common good in the world. So, as all you know, our classes are recorded because of the several participants who can't join us at this time. Please keep your mics muted unless you're speaking. I send them the recording after the class. So, Jay, I wanted to be quick and start right away because we have three different readings. Carol is doing our readings today. Carol is a writer, a poet, a spiritual influencer, and a teacher. I always like to say that Carol is is a mother and of rabbis, which is definitely true. She has raised three rabbis and four rabbis. And Carol is also a wife of a rabbi. So Carol is not just a Jewish influencer, also a rabbi influencer. So let's start. We have three readings. We are going to start with Shabbat, and Carol will respond with the poem, and then we have two readings from Torah. So let me share the screen, Carol, and then you can jump right in. I don't want to rush you, but I do want to cover all three readings today. So,
Okay, we'll try this. So the first piece, which we're not going to read, is The Sabbath is Freedom. And I hope that you'll take a moment to read Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is the author of both of these pieces. His first argument or thesis is that the Sabbath is a liberator from the self-imposed slavery of the workday week and the ways in which we liberate ourselves on Shabbat. So that is one piece. But Dr. Heschel was also a person who is very sensitive to the nuance of time. And I want to focus on that.
so is this right? Am I at the right place for
That's
you,
it.
Carol?
That's the correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry I gave you so much, We are the people of the book and, there's just lots to provide. So I'm going to read this and then maybe just use a little abbreviated response and then open it up, I hope, for some thoughts, ideas, or feelings from you. And, the introduction says a cliche almost that more than the Jews have kept the Shabbat, the Sabbath has kept the Jews. So keep that as a koan, if you will, to hold in your thoughts. The higher goal of spiritual living is not to amass a wealth of information, but to face sacred moments. Spiritual life begins to decay when we fail to sense the grandeur of what is eternal in time. Judaism is a religion of time aiming at the sanctification of time. Judaism teaches us to be attached to holiness in time, to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to concretize sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of the year. Jewish ritual may be characterized as an architecture of time. One of the most distinguished words in the Bible is the word kadosh, holy, a word which more than any other is representative of the mystery and majesty of the divine. Now, what was the first holy object in the history of the world? Was it a mountain or an altar? It is indeed a unique occasion at which the distinguished word kadosh is used for the first time. It's used at the end of the story of creation. How extremely significant is the fact that it is applied to time. And God blessed the seventh day and made it kadosh, made it holy. When we fail to sense the grandeur of what is eternal in time, Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. I just want to go down a little more. Judaism teaches us to be, sorry. Well, I'll just skip to the meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate rather than time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to the holiness and time. It is a day on which we are called to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. To set apart 1 day a week for freedom, a day on which we could not use the instruments which have been so easily turned into weapons of destruction. A day for being with ourselves, a day of detachment from the vulgar, of independence of external obligations, a day on which we stop worshiping the idols of technical civilization, a day on which we use no money, a day of armistice in the economic struggle with our fellow and the forces of nature. Is there any institution that holds out greater hope for human progress than the Sabbath? The solution of humankind's most vexing problem will not be found in renouncing technical civilization, but attaining some degree of independence from it. And so that is how Dr. Heschel lays out the notion of a palace in time, he calls it, a beautiful image, a palace in time. And for me, I guess the most significant day of the week is the Sabbath. And I'm going to summarize that simply in a little poem that I wrote, and then hopefully open this up for discussion. Jay, you know the poem. So this is the Sabbath. This is where I come alive, this every Friday night at sunset, with candles welcoming me from weekday cares. This is where I reconnect with children, lover, friends, a world at war with itself, my resting place of wine and loaves, this double portion of long ago, gathered around my sofa with a good book and loved ones praying for peace in Jerusalem and the world. This is where I return, always to the Sabbath, dancing my way back to ancestral chambers, joy encircling my heart. And so I think that little reflection serves to illustrate the grounding nature of Shabbat, the way in which it's, for me personally, my anchor. And we begin Shabbat, I always like to think of it as a courting ceremony. We begin by lighting candles and creating a meal. We don't cook on Shabbat, so we cook for Shabbat. So the meal is all prepared, the candles are laid, the bread is baked, and family and community are invited to sit down to the table with us and sing songs celebrating the holiness of the day. Shabbat is envisioned as a woman, Sophia. She's envisioned as the bride or the queen, and there are prayers to welcome her. People even dress in white or in their finest garments to welcome the presence of the divine Shabbat. And it's almost like wooing, sitting down to this meal of engagement. And at the end of Shabbat, we separate. We create a distinction between that day and the weekdays by having a ceremony called Havdalah, the separation, where you use a 3-branch candle and spices to revive you, because along with the welcoming of the Sabbath bride, we believe you've been given extra soul power, extra soul energy, another soul almost, a deepening of self. And when you release that at the end of Shabbat, you kind of revive yourself with sweet incense and spices. So there's the beginning, which is the wooing, kind of welcoming the Sabbath with candles, and the end, which is creating distinctions between the Shabbat and the rest of the week by holding a light up and looking in each other's eyes and remembering the sacredness we've shared, and inhaling the incense and reviving ourselves to yet another day in what I would call dailiness or ordinary life. I'd love to open this up for a discussion. Shabbat as a notion that we all have a weekend, we all have a, how is this in some sense, this biblical Shabbat somewhat different in tone from what we do on our weekends and how we live our, even our Sundays. Hi, Ellen.
So I'll facilitate. Let's open it up. And who would like to offer a comment? I can't see hands, so Sophia will help me, I think, to see who's raising a hand, if anyone is.
You don't have to. That's
if
good.
no-
I explained everything.
No, if no one is, then I'll get us started. So Carol, I've always been jealous hopefully in a good way, of the Sabbath. And it's because I've recognized how hurried and compulsively busy my life can be. And also actually how even times of so-called recreation can be hurried. Let's go out and have fun.
Hi.
And you can be hurried in the having of the fun. So there's a kind of compulsiveness to it, to weekends even, to weekends. And I was wondering, in a given Sabbath, do you actually experience a freedom from that compulsion to get things done? And do you think that people who don't have that ritual can find their own ways of arriving at Sabbath consciousness themselves in some other way?
Well, I hope that they can. That's my hope. And Arthur Green, who's a Jewish theologian, just wrote a book called Judaism for the World. And one of his offerings to the world is Shabbat, is the Sabbath. And he gives you some quick how-tos, like don't engage with money.
Mhm.
That's a big step. That's a real stepping back from the way we engage in life generally. Don't, benefit from what exists rather than what you're going to create.
Mhm.
So it's a mindset as much as it is an activity. I can do the laundry, I guess, but why would I? I can, whatever my tasks are, the compulsive need to clean up or the finish a task or meet a deadline. That's saying no to that is a kind of inner practice. We talk about spiritual practice. It's inner practice. And I see that there are hands raised, so I'd rather hear from
Yeah.
other people
Let's
than
do-
offer hands.
Let's
So
go to Lauren. Lauren raised her hand before we go to Tina after that. Lauren, you're muted. Would you unmute yourself?
Hi everyone. Thanks for telling me, Sophia. I really loved this, and I loved the imagery that is it Herschel or Heschel? I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Heschel.
Used Heschel, thank you. And it reminds me of something that I actually saw on social media a very long time ago, and it was just the idea of thinking of rest, taking rest as radical in today's society, because we are so driven to constantly just go, 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 and never, I'm so sorry, y'all, my cat is to just constantly be productive. And so I really love that the idea of the Sabbath, is something that you're allowed to just be, and that you're encouraged to just be and exist, because that's what you were created for, was to be. So thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. And Tina, you're next.
I just loved the poetry we heard from Rose, and I love the concept of keeping a Sabbath. And I have some close Christian friends who really attempt to do those suggestions that were listed, the 4 or 5. And now that and my children have been grown a long time, but I really feel like I'm in a headspace now where I would like to take a day of Sabbath, and it wouldn't necessarily for me be on a weekend because that's usually the only time I get to see my grandson. So, since I'm retired, it matters not what day I pick. So, I think it's a really, I can see that it would be a real cleansing type of activity and a real centering and mindful activity. And goodness knows, as Lauren said, in today's world, we need that. We're just constantly being bombarded by images and news, a lot of which is not very good. And it seems to me that would be a very refreshing practice for any person. And I just so highly respect Judaism for a lot of the beliefs that they show. And I think that this is one of them. And I have a good friend on Facebook who used to live here, doesn't anymore, but she was a Christian, is a Christian that converted to Judaism. And it's just really interesting to see her teach her young girls about the Sabbath, and she'll show photographs of them at Shabbat, and it's just been really a special thing, I think. And I do respect my Judeo-Christian roots and have become more and more appreciative of the Judeo part of that. Okay, that's all.
I really enjoyed Jay listening and hearing about the concept of holiness in time and the sacredness of a specific time and not necessarily the space. Partially because that's how it has been, it is for me. Like when I pray 5 times a day, it's the time that matters. And I have prayed in schools, colleges, home, offices, on the side of a highway, in a McDonald's, in a mall, just any place, because those 5 times come very quickly. So I really love this emphasis of Judaism, that it attaches to the sacredness of time. And one thing that I really that touched me, fascinated me, what Rose said, Carol said, was how the coming of Sabbath is celebrated with the feminine energy around it. That's fascinating. I never thought of that. I never actually heard that. Maybe I heard that and I didn't register it. But I love that concept of receiving Sabbath as a bride, as a guest, and celebrating it. So thank you for sharing that, Carol.
And I think I said it specifically for your ears because we've shared the idea of what is the place of the feminine in the in the devotional life. And I think that the notion, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
The notion of encouraging receptivity. How else can you do it if you don't start by inviting receptivity, the receptive feminine energy? We function on a different set of wires during the week, and then to settle into that receptivity and envisioning it as a bride or a guest or a queen, it's helpful, right? To switch the gears from weekday to Shabbat consciousness. Thanks.
Carol, somebody else raised their hand. I was going to tell you something. I once undertook a course to learn to be a spiritual director, and it was at the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And at one of the workshops, they called it a Sabbath day. And we began with candles and by welcoming the Sabbath Queen. And it was a mixed group. I would say 15 or 20 of us, gender-wise. But we welcomed the Sabbath Queen. And the way it was done by an Episcopal priest. The Sabbath Queen herself felt so palpable. It was not the sense that we were conjuring an image in our imaginations that would then inspire us. It was the sense of an actual presence that was descending into our group at that time. And you know what the Christian Eucharist is, the Holy Communion. They celebrated Holy Communion during that too, but there were no words. And so it was the bread and the wine, pure and simple. And then the whole rest of the day, I think it began at night, began in the evening. The next day was a silent day. And the only instruction we were given on that next day was don't do anything that's compulsive. And there was a newspaper there.
Right.
And I'm a compulsive newsaholic.
As is
I
Neil.
want to know what's happening. And I realized that to grab that newspaper on that day would have been compulsive, as it actually always is. So I just want to say from firsthand experience, I think I've had a little taste of the Sabbath Queen, and I'm very grateful to her.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. I have two fond memories, and then I want to open up perhaps another avenue. But Neil and I were fortunate enough to do a Shabbat retreat. It turned out that we had 12 people with us, so it felt very much like the right table at St. Benedict's Monastery. We conducted a Shabbat for people who came from the St. Benedict's community, not the nuns, they were in attendance, but there were other individuals who chose to have a Shabbat experience as Jesus might have. That was their inspiration for celebrating Shabbat. And it stands out for me as one of the most significant Sabbaths I've ever experienced, because people came to this with such a freshness and openness to what might be the shift in gears. And the newspaper, I laugh because the newspaper was one of the first things that people recognized as something that they go to all the time, and how irrelevant it was in the tone that welcoming the Sabbath bride had created, and how irrelevant other things became. And I think Lauren said to be, what is it like to just be in the presence of this very palpable bride, queen presence? And people did that in various ways. They went for walks, they engaged in text study together, they sang, people just got together and sang in a circle, no instruments, just the vocal sharing. So that's one of my key memories, and the Shalem Center certainly has done that for folks across the board. If there's nothing else about Shabbat as the time of receptivity and the presence of what we're calling the additional soul, which is what it's called in Hebrew, the Neshama Yetera, that you receive an additional soul, or the possibility for receiving in a soulful way, a heightened way, I guess. I want to look at a heightened kind of experience, and that it's kind of a dangerous experience because it's not, it doesn't bear logical definitions, but it invites your imagination, your spiritual insight. And that is the prophets who see the world through gifted eyes, I would say. Where veils are lifted and reality becomes apparent in a magical way. So for me, I chose Shekhinah. I chose Ezekiel's calling, or Ezekiel's vision, which I think we have on our screen. And I think if I can do this, I just would like us to kind of close our eyes, listen to the vision, because I will add that this vision is used by Kabbalists, by Jewish mystics to meditate on. And it's not reading for information as much as it is reading for inspiration. And I'm going to read Yechezkel, I'm going to read Ezekiel, and just allow it to wash over you. And then maybe we can have some responses to what this vision is about. So in the 13th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles by the Cheber Canal, the heavens opened and I saw visions of God. I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire, surrounded by a radiance, and in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. In the center of it were the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings. However, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. They had human hands below their wings. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front, the face of a lion on the right, the face of an ox on the left, and the face of an eagle at the back. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire, and lightning issued from the fire. Above the head of the creatures was a form, an expanse, with an awe-inspiring gleam of crystal. Above the expanse was the semblance of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and on top, upon the semblance of a throne, there was the semblance of a human form. So, whoa. I lost the screen. So I'm opening this up, I guess, to the, what did you hear? What did you sense? What did you see? What did you feel in the message of Ezekiel? Because it's a message we return to, we read it. I want to say again that we read it several times during the year, but we read it specifically on the same day that we read the description of Moses receiving the Torah. So the communal experience of revelation is Sinai. The personal documentation or recording of revelation is Ezekiel. So, and they're read together as kind of the full power of a revelatory experience. So I just want to open it up as a possible discussion point. It's certainly something that we share in our scriptures, right? It's read in both the older and the newer readings. How do you experience this vision of Ezekiel, and where does it play inside your own spiritual life as you listen to the words of the prophet?
Let's add Meg to our conversation.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to apologize because there's work being done on my house. So the pounding is not my heart, it is pounding. Quickly, the one thing that really struck me, and you talked about community, Carol, are the various animals involved in the creatures. And on a very just surface level, what I heard was strength of the lion. Well, actually, brute strength of the ox, actual sort of dominion of the lion, and the idea of soaring over things as would the eagle, to have a perception, and all of this contained within the human form. So, and you're talking about the bulk of people at Sinai, and what are we made up of? At any one moment, we might be any one of those 4 creatures, none of them, we could be a mouse, but that's what I got.
What did you hear in the vision? Does it speak to us? It is a point of meditation for Kabbalists. They will return to this image as a way of becoming more focused and centered in their own practice of Jewish ritual. So why would this text continue to speak, and does it continue to speak, and in what way does it inform you? I picked it for Sophia because it's a mystical text, and so I thought, well, Sufis could buy in at that level.
Well, it'll take me days to dwell on it because I think it's very powerful. And this is the first time I've heard it. I can't absorb it enough yet, but I do feel the power washing over me since you said you picked it for me. But let's go to Lauren and see how Lauren wants to contribute to this discussion.
What really stuck out to me the most was just the imagery, or kind of blurry imagery of the throne up in heaven, and of the semblance of a human form on this throne. And I think it's very interesting because in my mind it makes me think of we will never fully understand God or the divine while we are still humans on earth. And I don't know, maybe even after we leave our bodies, we may still not ever fully understand or fully see all that the divine is. So it was a very like awe-inspiring image, but it was also still humbling because it reminded me of, we don't have to know everything all the time in order for us to believe or to be inspired or to feel something. So thank you.
Elizabeth?
I have Debbie. Debbie, would you unmute yourself?
Okay. So building on what Lauren said and Sophia, it's something that I had never heard before in its entirety like that. And it just was overwhelming. It'll take a while. But what struck me was it was this vivid visual, highly visual imagery. And yet I still have no idea what God looks like or what God is or anything. And that's okay.
Lynn?
This Lynn? Okay. I am struck by the unity of the image. And to me, the whole thing is that's life. That we are all connected. We're connected to the animals, all of the animals. We're connected to each other. And we are somewhat, because the faces could go in whatever direction they wanted to go in, we are kind of we're not in control of our destiny necessarily, but we are certainly in control of recognizing that unity and recognizing that we are a community of life, and that extends to everything around us. If that's the image of God that Isaiah sees, I kind of can latch on to that. And that would also fit into what we studied last week, which is B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all living creatures, and all of life is representative of God's spirit, or the divine image.
I want to see if there's anyone else that wants to respond. Thank you. Everybody's given me so much insight. This time,
I'd like to add a little something,
yeah,
Carol.
sure.
when I read that passage and hear you share it with us in that way, I can't help but think of shamanism, the shamanic traditions really around the world. And among them would be Native American traditions, but the whole idea of shamanism emerged in Siberia. So it's by no means limited to this continent. In the shamanic traditions, you have visions. And the visions always include animals and elements as well as people.
Right.
And to have a vision is different from reading about someone else's vision. And when you have a vision like that, it's both, there's an emotional dimension to it. It's both fascinating and terrifying. And it's sometimes said that the experience of the holy involves those two emotions, fascination, attraction, but also terror, fear, and together. And so Rudolf Otto, a famous philosopher of religious experience, coined the phrase mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery both terrifying and fascinating. But what really strikes me, Carol, is that it's one thing to entertain those images kind of in the comfort of a home and in safety, but it would be quite another to have them vividly presented in a moment of ecstasy. And I can well imagine that that's both terrifying and attractive. So what is terrifying about it? I wonder if one thing terrifying, one thing, isn't precisely what Len says. That while the idea of unity, that we're connected with the whole, that everything, the snakes, the serpents, the insects, the lions, the cheetahs, the earthworms, that they're part of us and we're part of them. And I don't know if the human soul can handle
hold it, right.
that much unity. In a way, it's a frightening unity. So I can understand a resistance. That's what I thought when I heard them.
I just want to say one thing, that two words that are in Hebrew, first of all, to talk about Rudolf Otto, yira and ahava, the awe and great love. They're almost intermingled, in the notion of the mysterium tremendum, this moment that's beyond language even. Remember, we're using language to capture experience. And in the language, Yechezkel, the prophet, is saying, it's as if, kemo. There's a word that reoccurs. It's a semblance, they say in English, this English translation, but in Hebrew, it's kemo. It's as if. I can't grasp it yet, but I'm making space for this. I can't grasp it. I can't hold it. This awesome notion of oneness. And I think you're bang on. I also want to add that the prophet had this unbidden, right? It's not how he sat down to meditate.
Yeah.
He was gifted with this, where it was bestowed upon him. It fell upon him. Yeah. It was a gift of consciousness. Yeah. And ever to be remembered, but I think often to help inspire our own vision. And that is how I think it can be used. So the animals, the shamanist, influences, the notion that there's power in the world and that it moves in different directions and has different potential. And we somehow are in the center of all of this. it kind of continues to open space. They all move in their own direction. If the human face is in the center and these are all moving in their own direction, we're creating an enormous space for that which might be called the throne, on what might be seen as sapphire, on what might be a human form. So we're just opening up, opening up, opening up. Incredibly difficult to hold. But yeah, I see another hand, maybe.
Actually, I want to ask Lynn, Debbie, and Tina, are your hands up from the last comments, or just speak up if it's a new comment?
I just wanted to say something about the wings and the amber in that context, if you want to hear it.
Go ahead, Lynn.
ahead.
Tina, go ahead.
Well, the wings to me symbolize something angelic, and to me, angels are messengers. And then the amber, I've had really profound and what kind of a watershed dream involving amber. And there's a lot of symbolic dream, meanings for amber. But in this particular context, I see amber, and possibly that amber can be can hold fossils. They have found many different fossils and things in different parts of the world that have amber. And my dream that there was something that was fossilized in the amber that became a very important symbol. And so the amber is really grabbed me when I heard about the amber, because for me it's a powerful symbol. And then the wings, represent to me that there's a very profound message, in the symbolism of everything that's in that vision. And I've had mystical visions before, and Ezekiel is one of my favorite books, I guess, because there is mysticism in there. That's all I had to say.
Carol, shall we go to your next passage?
Oh, you think you still have time?
Yeah, we have time to do the last one. What do you say, Jay?
Yeah, let's do.
Okay, I just lost the page. Hang on.
Okay, I'm going to bring it on the screen so you can see here. Here.
So just to keep your that mystical space open, I guess Isaiah's vision, also familiar to those who read scriptures. In the year that King Uzziah died, I beheld my Lord seated on a high and lofty throne. The skirts of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs stood in attendance on him. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his legs, and with 2 he would fly. And one would call to the other, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 the Lord of hosts. His presence fills all the earth, I cried. Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a human of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, the Lord of hosts. So another inspired vision, this time I think he's more specific in what this prophet sees, but I'm opening it again to the possibility of why would people continue to recite, as we do in temple, that phrase, holy, 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 and enact this. We actually do in synagogue, stand and recite the passage and say, holy, holy, holy. Becoming like the angels, we stand in a very specific form. We put our legs together, stand very erect, and then lift ourselves 3 times as we say the words, holy, holy, holy. Still part of our prayer life today. So in the reading of these scriptures, there's almost a choreography. How do you dance yourself into the awareness, be it ever so humble, these three little steps of elevation? How do you dance yourself into awareness, I'm going to say. So I don't know if it's read that way, if you've read scriptures that way, where you accompany that with a physical movement, but that is part of our Sabbath prayers. So any comments on the prophetic vision or the enactment of those three words? Ellen, did you ever think about it that way?
I was waiting for someone to call on me.
Well, I was waiting for you to speak.
What I wanted to say is I have always been in awe of these visions, trying to understand them, but actually feeling like I always came short. That I felt like there was this presence of God that I was really not tuning into. And I appreciate what everyone has said because it's given me an insight that I wasn't able to conjure up myself, because mine was always about awe and fear, as you talked about. And the idea that this is what it's going to be like after death, and that perhaps I have to wait until then before I'm able to grab hold of such visions for myself. But in terms of what the choreography of the tefillah, of the prayer on when we say kadosh, 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 sorry, 3 times, somehow I got 5 in there, 3, is to, the choreography helps me connect. So I try to keep my feet together. I try to keep my balance as I'm lifting my heels up to say kadosh, 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 because if I don't connect with prayer at any other time during that 2-hour or 1-hour service, this is the time for me where I feel like I can do what we're supposed to do, which is to become the angel, to be at one with this vision. And so this is my human attempt to become part of that vision, which has been so difficult for me otherwise. And I actually look forward to this time. And so if people want to pass in front of me when I'm sitting in a pew, which hasn't happened for the last 2 years, but presumably when we're gathered together in our community, in our chevra, I want this time to be just, I don't wear a prayer shawl, I don't wear a talit, but I know that there are people who put that over their heads so that they can just commune with God during that time. And if there was ever a time where I felt like I should be wearing this prayer shawl, it's this time. And I'm actually still contemplating, even though I'm 72 years old, so I've been doing this for 72 years, I'm thinking maybe this 72nd year will be the time when I actually do that and raise myself just one more notch. I don't know, Carol, do you wear a talit? You do? Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm almost there.
I made mine out of velvet. It's very feminine and it's very old because I started wearing a talit in the late 60s, 70s, and the 70s. So.
Ellen and Carol, will you take us back to these gatherings? I'm always deeply inspired by communal prayers or communal gatherings. And Carol mentioned that both these passages are read together and read aloud, if I didn't hear it wrong. And Ellen, you mentioned about awe and fear, which I felt as Carol was reading them. So I want to just imagine that spiritual, that religious gathering and that spiritual union which is happening at that time in that gathering, and what is the role of community in it? Why do you all do it together? What is the energy like at that time? Would you speak to that?
I can try to do it. I think it's known that Jewish prayer can only be conducted with a quorum of 10, so that the divine presence is welcomed among us. That's, count 10 individuals to make a quorum so that we can host the presence. So that's the beginning of community, right? Making space for the presence to be to stand in the presence of the presence. And you need the energies of 10 individuals, minimally 10 individuals, to create that space. That's maybe a very basic level of community. But if you can imagine people singing this, Kadosh, 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 in their little individual places, how that resonates through the air and the potential aliveness that is, awakened. That's what I think community is. It allows for the individual experience to be enhanced through the megaphone of community. That's about all I can say. Is it felt or understood by every congregant? No. Is it something, it's aspirational. It's what we strive for in prayer. And when the piece from Ezekiel is read, there are people who read that with consciousness. So let's say on the night that we received the Torah, Neil and I will have a service and in the synagogue by a stained glass window, and we'll have a canopy set up so that when the receiving of the Torah is read or when Ezekiel's vision is read, we stand under a canopy, actually physically welcoming in that union that we aspire toward. But is it every week in every single prayer situation that people feel the elevation that Ellen described? It's hard to know, but it's what we aim for. It's what we aspire to. Having that one moment of that instant of connection. And sometimes it's embodied, that just that movement, the physical movement. Sometimes it's an embodied sense. Sometimes the experience is just knowing that someone else standing next to you is doing the same thing. But you should know from your own community, right? When people bow together, there's some kind of energy that's created. When people elevate themselves together, there's some energy that's created. And we feel supported in our quest. Maybe that's the most important thing, is that we feel supported in the quest for becoming intimate with the divine. I don't have anything else to add.
Debbie, you have a comment, and then we'll go to Lynn. Unmute.
Debbie, unmute, please.
A sense of community that we strive to be a part of in prayer. I think other people have different points in the service. The Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh is one. For me, it's always been the Shema. I cannot sing the Shema or say the Shema without crying, because the minute I say it, and especially if I say it with other people, but even by myself, I feel the presence of thousands of years of Jews and Jewish souls all saying it at the same times, for Shabbat, for instance, or randomly during the day. And it just makes me weak. There's that sense of connection. It's always been the Shema.
We have Lynn and then Carmen.
I wanted to comment not on so much on community, but on the element of fear. And as Jay talked about, of terror. I mean, I'm 72 also, Ellen. I had never, ever, in any synagogue experience or any personal experience, felt terror or fear. I, I don't know why. I can't explain it, but I've always felt when I have felt that presence, it has always been, I certainly felt awe, but never fear, ever. And I agree with Debbie, with what Debbie just said. Um, that the Shema is the one that does it for me. Although I have to say that the choreography of the Kadosh, followed by another prayer of holiness, always inspires me to add to it, to add to that choreography. And I am not a dancer, so that in itself is interesting.
Shema prayer is the prayer that that declares the oneness of God. Oneness of God. That is that affirmation.
Carmen, would you unmute yourself?
Thank you. I'm just thinking about psychologically the power of ritual and how important it is for all of us in whatever we do to solidify the important things in our lives with rituals, birthdays, weddings, funerals, even on a daily basis, just small rituals and huge religious rituals, and how for each of us they can mean so much. And yet I know for myself, if you say, well, what does that particular ritual mean to you? A lot of times I would have to pause and really look deeply, because it is a deeper connection to something. And sometimes there's something subconscious going on. I know it, there's deep stuff. And I found a quotation from Carl Jung, and he said, every religion makes use of 2 feet, faith on one side and ritual on the other.
So I think, Sophia, if there's nothing else to say, I want to say thank you for the opportunity for sharing from the inside out what some of these texts mean, at least through this filter, and how grateful I am to be able to share that.
Jay, do you want to, we're almost at the end. We have a minute. Do you want to say anything about, we're ending our 2 days of 2 weeks of Jewish scripture reading. And I let Jay close today, but I'll say this, that I'm really grateful to you, Carol Rose, and to you, Ellen Polsky, for giving us such a beautiful representation of Jewish scripture from the diversity of the Jewish text that you both picked. I mean, we talked about Shabbat, of course, resting, but also about enjoying life. We talked about sense of responsibility towards ourselves and others as it comes from the scripture. We talked about what God requires from us and our deeply personal relationship with God, and also the transcendent relationship with God. We had a passage about we made in the image of God, from dust to dust we returned. So what you gave us in these 2 weeks from Jewish scripture has been just enlightening for me personally. And I've been exposed to Judaism for decades, and I've had Jewish friends, but I never actually read Jewish scripture. So I'm grateful to both of you to give us this diversity of scripture. And Jay, do you want to add anything before we close today?
There's nothing to add that Sophia didn't say, but Carol and Ellen, I too want to thank you. And I think you've given us an experience of Judaism from your inside. You can't represent the whole of Judaism. We know that, but you can represent what it feels like to you. And we've really learned and benefited. And thank you so much to both of you. And actually to everyone who's participated, and to those who have participated by listening alone, that's a way of participating too. So I'm grateful. I think these have been great sessions. Thank you.
We have lots of thanks to you from in our chat from Meg, Becky, Nita, Carmen, Tina, and Melanie. And I will actually close today from just 4 lines from Jewish scripture. To me, that was Judaism always, but now it's much more than that after learning from you. So here
Sophia,
it goes.
just before you begin, I thank you, Jay, for acknowledging. I'm listening, I'm processing, I'm taking it in. But one of the things, as you all know, that some may know, that is essential to me is that the powerful sharing, but also the intersection of the diversity of our faith. Our faiths are really may be said, and our processes by which we go about living out our faith may have different traditions or denominations, but there's an intersection. And the intersection is the power in the human spirit and our belief and connection to God. We are all connected to God. And I'm always searching and asking God to help me connect to others who are of different faith and different culture. And I pray that that will always be my mantra of how can we reclaim our common humanity through God.
Thank you, Melanie. That could be our closing poem today. Your words were poetic, beautiful, and lyrical. And that's the end of our session. We'll see you with a new faith and a new scripture next time. Salam, peace, and shalom.